In 2013, Colleen Murphy's daughter, Lauren, was hit by a car and suffered severe brain damage. With the help of specialists from all over the country, her family and friends, as well as Colleen's personal strong faith, she was able to piece their lives back again. You do not want to miss this phenomenal miracle story.
Have you ever felt like giving up, quitting, throwing in the towel? Welcome to Never Ever Give Up Hope featuring Carol Graham. She's an author, health coach, and motivational speaker. Backed into a corner multiple times in her life, Carol shares with you stories on how she overcame some of the toughest obstacles a person can go through in life, but refused to give up hope. Rather than admit defeat, an opportunity was presented, and it involves each and every one of you. Carol will feature spectacular guests who will share their messages of hope, encouragement, and their inspiration to prove why life's adversities only make you stronger. And now, welcoming the host of the show, here's Carol Graham.
Thank you, Colleen Murphy, for being on Never Ever Give Up Hope. And I can't wait to hear your full story. Now, you are the mother of 7 children, which is beyond my ability
After 4,
to
it's
understand.
easy.
But
Once you hit 4, they come easy.
okay, I'll remember that. Anyway, what I would like you to share, of course, is your story. And let's start at the beginning. Tell us what happened, possibly where you were that day, and everything that surrounds it. So please tell the story about your daughter,
Sure.
Lauren.
So it was a Friday. It was April 19th, 2013, and I had headed out of work just a little bit early because I was going to try to catch my 17-year-old daughter, Kelsey's soccer game. She was playing high school soccer. And I left my office, and as I was, just merging onto the highway, I got a phone call, and it said private number. Now, normally, I don't answer those because it's somebody trying to sell something. But for whatever reason, I answered this one. And there was a man on the phone, and he identified himself as a Los Angeles detective. And my daughter Lauren lived in New York at the time, and she was on a business trip in LA. I had spoken to her that morning and, got cut off as I was pulling into a parking garage and never got a chance to call her back. And the first thing that he said to me was, "How are you related to Lauren Murphy?" Now, I don't know about you with your kids, but my first thought was, oh God, what did she do? Why are the
Of
police calling me?
course.
And, he then went on to tell me that she had been involved in an accident and she was hit by a car while out on a morning run. Now, my next thought is, why isn't she calling me? I'm thinking maybe she had a broken bone or two. But as the conversation unfolded, I soon realized that we were dealing with something a little more serious than a broken bone. And at that time, I did ask him if she had head trauma. And he said no, but he believed she had some internal injuries, and he gave me a phone number of a hospital social worker to call. So that was my next phone call. And again, when she answered, I asked if Lauren had head trauma. Looking back, I think it had to have been just mother's intuition, because even though the detective had told me no, she did not, somehow I just knew. And once she told me that, yes, she had head trauma, I worked in the medical field on the insurance side. So
Oh, okay.
I knew how serious this was. And I had to ask a question that I didn't want to ask, but I knew with us being in St. Louis and Lauren being in Los Angeles, I needed to know. And I asked her if Lauren was going to die. And there was a long
Really?
pause. Yeah, there was a
Wow.
very long pause. And when she spoke, she finally said, "If you're asking me if you need to come, the answer is yes."
Wow.
So, I hung up the phone. I scribbled down all the information. Lauren was in the system as a Jane Doe. It had taken them several hours to even identify her. So I called my husband. He started working on getting the very first flight he could for us out of St. Louis, out of Lambert Airport, and we boarded, a plane a few hours later. And, at that time, we did not know if she was even going to be alive by the time we got there. And when we arrived, it was a little after midnight, which was 2 in the morning St. Louis time. And, when we, walked over the threshold of that ICU room, we knew that our lives were never going to be the same again. And it was tough. It was really, really tough. So the story is, it is, it's pretty vast and it's pretty big. And, those first few weeks were touch and go. We did not know if she was going to make it through the night, the week, the day, the hour. We had a couple times, one particular time where her heart rate dropped so low that, they were giving her shots of epi. This is the kind of stuff you see in
Wow.
TV
Yes.
shows.
Yes.
And they put the pads on her chest and on her back to prepare her body for the paddles. And they brought the crash cart in, and those were the moments that, I was frozen in the corner of the room in my chair. I felt like, do I get up? Do I leave? And all I could do is just grasp my rosary and pray those prayers that you learn. I went all through Catholic grade school, and you learn all those prayers and you say them just kind of on autopilot. And you don't really think about them as much as you say them, because they just become,
Part of
just
you.
second nature.
Yeah.
Yes, they're part of you. But never have I prayed prayers with such devotion and, desperation as in those moments, and as I prayed those prayers to myself, I watched those heart monitors, they descended for so long, and then they just started, going up 1, 2, 3, until we got a normal sinus rhythm. And, it was tough. Those were, some of those days just kind of blurred together. It was really touch and go for several weeks. And it was probably a good 4 weeks before, we knew she was out of the woods. But then, our fears came from, is she going to make it through the day, to what kind of life is she going to have, because she was in a coma for quite a while. And when she emerged from the coma, it was worse. It
Oh my
was,
goodness.
when she woke up, and her eyes were open, I never thought you could, look at somebody that could be so blank. Her lights were,
Mm.
I mean, the lights were on, but nobody was home. And I remember thinking, God forgive me, but please go back to sleep. It was just too hard to see her like that. And I just thought, this can't be it. This can't be her future. And, it was hard enough to see her being kept alive by machines and, battered and bruised. But, once the bruising went away, and, she had, they did the tracheotomy. And when they came to me and said that they wanted to do this trach, I knew Lauren would hate it. Vanity was really important to Lauren. But I knew that there was no place for vanity in this ICU room. So we had to do what was best. And they kept telling me she's going to look so much better. All of those tubes are going to be gone from her face. And, I was anxious to walk in, because I thought, oh, she's going to look so much better. And she didn't look better. To me, she looked more broken. So
Oh.
instead, those tubes are no longer on in her mouth. Now they're in her neck, which now has a hole in it. So, I think to the medical world, it's better. But to a mother,
Yes.
it was hard. So, I mean, those first few, actually, those first few months were tough, really, really tough. So, from there, once, she emerged from her coma, it was, like I said, it was slow. And, once she was medically stable, she was airlifted by private medical jet to the Rehab Institute of Chicago. And we were very, very fortunate, because it is one of the top 3 brain injury facilities in the country. There's Craig in Colorado. There is Shepherd in Atlanta, and then there is RAC that is in Chicago. So we were airlifted there, and when she arrived, she couldn't hold her head up. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know who we were. She didn't know, who she even was. She was basically just existing.
Yes.
And all signs kind of pointed to possibly a future in a nursing home. And that's even what doctors discussed with us at some point, but we knew that we had to give her the best chance that we could and get her in front of the best specialists, and have faith in God, faith in the power of prayer, faith in the power of the human spirit, and faith in our own daughter. And, slowly but surely, she started coming back to us. And, and this is, when I say slowly, that's not an understatement. This is, months and months and months of grueling speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, recreational therapy. And Lauren was pretty much nonverbal for almost 2 years. And, within the first year, she was able to say some of the automatic things, like, hello, how are you? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, things that you don't have to think about.
Exactly.
Anything that required brain processing, she couldn't do. And at this time, we knew, because they had mentioned it to us, but, we didn't even really know much about it, but that she had a condition that's called aphasia. And I didn't know much about aphasia. And at this point, early on, we're worrying about, her just surviving, much less the speech and language, deficits that she would have. But aphasia is caused by damage to the brain. And in Lauren's case, it was caused because she had that portion of her brain removed when they did the original brain surgery. So she had a large section of her left temporal lobe removed, which is where her language center is housed. So not only could she not find her words, she couldn't understand anything we were saying. So as she emerged, imagine the confusion.
Yes,
she is, her brain is starting to wake up a little bit. And when people are talking to her, it's like they're speaking in German. She has no idea what anyone is saying to her. So it was, it was a slow process. And, neuroplasticity is what got her to where she is today. And the fact that she was young was very helpful. She was 25 at the time of her accident. And in the beginning, that was kind of the only positive they would give us is she's young, we'll wait and see. And with brain injury, it's different than, if you break a leg, they know, okay, we're going to fix this leg.
Right.
But when you damage your brain, they have no idea. No two brain injuries are alike. And even if they were alike, the outcomes aren't alike. There's so many factors in what helps somebody do well and what doesn't. And when we finally were discharged from inpatient rehab, which was 127 days after her accident, the doctor met us in the hallway as we were walking the halls, and he said, I don't know what magical combination that you need just to survive this, and overcome, but Lauren, you surely have it. And, we high-fived, and I thought, what, I knew I was right, because this was the same doctor that told me that she'd probably never walk again. They were working on just getting her to stand and pivot, which is something that they use to try to help patients, transfer from the bed to the wheelchair to the shower chair, et cetera. But she was walking, when she left. Not real steady, but she was walking. And it has been, definitely a journey. And, we're skipping over a lot of the raw details, but, it was pretty desperate in those early days and early months.
So I have a couple questions before we continue with the story. First of all, were you alone or did you have support in your...
Yeah. So we had tremendous support, with having 7 children, you have to think that with each child, you have a whole network of friends for each soccer team, for each softball team, for each school community. So our network was just huge. And the community support that we had was unbelievable. And people reached out to celebrities and they reached out to us. We had Taylor Swift came to visit us in the hospital. She donated $25,000 to our family to fly our family back and forth from Los Angeles and Chicago. And it was just, unreal. But, celebrities are great. And we had sports figures that showed up for us too, people, members of the St. Louis Blues and the St. Louis Cardinals. And those are great. But what was even better was the everyday people that, just force and helped us feel like we weren't alone. And there were so many days, especially at RIC, where I would have a really rough day, and I would keep my emotions in check. I gave myself about 10, 15 minutes every single day to go sit on a bench and cry. And then I would wipe my
Mm,
eyes and go back in and, get down to business. And it was important to me to keep negative energy out of her
right.
hospital room. And some of those days that were rough, I would walk home. Somebody donated us an apartment in Chicago, which was about a mile from RIC, so I could walk back and forth. And we always joke that Lauren picks the most expensive cities to be in. We were in LA, she lived in New York, and now we're in Chicago. So when we were in Los Angeles, I had to get an apartment, and I lived above a garage, and it was $4,000 a month for this little
Oh my
apartment. That
goodness.
was actually, I think it might have been $6,000 a month. It was a
Oh,
crazy amount, but anyway, so now we're in Chicago. We have this free apartment, but I would walk home some days with my head hung low, and I would pass all of these restaurants, that were in downtown Chicago, and I would see people and families and laughing, and I just wanted to scream. It was tough. And I would walk into my apartment, and I would get to the doorstep, and there would be packages waiting for me, or cards from people
oh,
that seemed to show up when I needed them most. Those encouragements that, I just felt like we're never going to get out of this. And then I would receive a letter from somebody that would tell me how much Lauren's accident has affected them in a positive way. So without the community, I don't think I could have done what I was doing. And a lot of this time I was by myself, because my husband had to
yes.
take care of the other 6 kids, and we had a lot of outside help with that. And we had a lot of, especially when we got to the summer months, the kids would take the train up from St. Louis to Chicago, and so they would stay with me
Hmm.
on the weekends. So I did have a lot of help from my family, but surprisingly enough, and I would bet it's pretty common for any type of family that goes through tragedy, is it's the people that you don't even know that mean the most. You get so many cards or emails that start out with "You don't know me, but." And, that's the kind of things where you felt like the whole world had your back and there's no way you could fail.
On the other side of that, did you have to deal, or your husband, with anger and unforgiveness?
So, as far as the driver, I never had anger there. From early on, I knew that it was Lauren's fault. When she started crossing the street, it still said walk, but it was flashing. And then when the light turned green, there was a truck that was blocking the driver's view of Lauren and her view of him. So, I mean, it really was like just an
Okay.
accident.
Hmm.
So, there was never any anger towards the driver because I felt like, it was an accident. There was, and my husband at one point said, what if he was texting? And I'm like, you know what? I don't care. There was no malice. It was an accident. And to me, I felt like I don't need to have that emotion right now. I,
Hmm.
I just felt like anger is not where it needs to be in this ICU room. But when I got to Chicago, there was a time that she had to have her fourth brain surgery. And we were at Northwestern Hospital, which was just down the street from RIC. And when we were in ICU, I mean, the care was so great. And then we went to RIC, and it's a brain injury facility, and again, excellent care. But when we got to Northwestern, and Lauren was on like a neuro floor, which is mainly strokes, but it seemed like her deficits were like multiplied by 1,000 because the staff just didn't know what to do with her because she was so bad. And like little things like when she had to have medication on her tongue to prevent thrush, which is like an oral infection
Hmm.
for people that are not eating. They get infections because they're not using she was being fed by a feeding tube at this point. And the nurse would say, stick out your tongue for me. Well, Lauren couldn't understand words, nor could she stick out her tongue, nor could she do anything. And she didn't know what to do. So it was really, really hard. And Lauren had her fourth, like I said, her fourth brain surgery. And, my husband was out of vacation days in Chicago all by myself. And I remember just like sitting in that waiting room, just with the tears, just like flowing. And it was hard. It was really, really hard. And it was exhausting, mentally exhausted, physically exhausting. And after surgery, they wanted to keep her an extra night because she had a small brain bleed. And, it was kind of like, oh, it's not a big deal, small brain bleed. Who would have thought that would be no big deal? But, for Lauren, her brain had been hemorrhaging in the early weeks. So the next day they took her down for a CT scan to see if the bleeding had stopped. And they came back upstairs and said, they couldn't do the CT scan because she couldn't follow directions. And
Oh, wow.
so I opened the door. I heard him in the hallway, and I came out and I said, "Are we supposed to just guess whether or not her brain is bleeding then. And they kind of looked at me kind of funny. And then they had me go down with her and, helped hold her hands where they needed to be, or her head where they needed to be, whatever. And at this time I was just so frustrated. I was
Of
frustrated with
course.
being in the hospital. I was frustrated with, crappy coffee, being cold. I'm always cold anyway. When you're in a hospital, it's even more. I was tired of smelling like a hospital. And, and my husband had actually showed up that evening, kind of like my knight in shining armor. That day, he ended up kind of like, enough is enough. It was hard for him to be away, and he ended up taking a leave of absence from work and hopped on the first plane he could to Chicago and was there, by 9 o'clock that night. And, I was, for the first time, I was just angry. I was so angry at everything. I was angry at the situation. I was angry at Lauren. I was thinking, why did you walk in front of this car? Do you see what this is, done to my life? Do you understand what you've done? And then the mother's guilt comes in. Like, it's not her fault, and as much as I hate what it's done to my life, what has it done to her life? And then it's like, shame on me. Once again, I felt like I was the grand prize winner of the worst mother in the world award. Here I am putting my anger
Yep.
towards
Yep.
her, but that was probably my angriest moment. It was just, and I think it was, based on, it's just being mentally and physically exhausted. And it was a pretty big turning point for me because I realized, this isn't anybody's fault. This is just what it is. And I need to just figure out how to move forward.
I really appreciate you being that raw and that honest, and I thank you for answering those questions because I know that there are people who are probably relating on some level with you. Now we are going to hear the rest of the story, but before we do that, we're going to take a short 15-second break, and then we're going to hear what happened next.
Carol Graham would like to show you the path from misery to miraculous triumph in her fast-paced memoir, Battered Hope. She relates her determination to succeed as someone who experienced one horrendous nightmare after another. Gang raped and left for dead, loss of a child, husband falsely imprisoned, and cancer. Nothing could break her tenacity or faith. No matter what you face, heartache, loss, suffering, or injustice, Carol will illustrate how she became a victor the same way you can. The secret is to never, ever give up hope. Order your copy at Amazon or batteredhope.blogspot.com.
Listening to Colleen Murphy's story, I am sure that you are wondering what happened next. Colleen has been raw and been open and honest of both what she was going through, along with the story and everything that happened. And so now we want to continue by finding out what happened next. Share with us.
Sure. So by the time we arrived home, accident was April. We are now the very end of August, and she's now going to start her outpatient journey. And, now I was in charge of everything. And while we were at RIC, I still did a lot of it. I took over all of her showers and all the things, but I hadn't been in charge of her medication. And so now it was all on me, which was, the pressure was pretty immense because, I had my her through, but, making sure she has her medication. And, Lauren, a side effect of the brain injury is she's now an epileptic. So, having her medication on time was very, very important. So it was hard. And, she progressed pretty slow. But, we eventually, and again, I'm fast forwarding pretty quickly because brain injury is crazy. And, there's a lot of funny things that happen, but intertwined throughout all of this, we're having our house reconstructed to make it handicap accessible. And, we have to have a wheel-in shower because, like I said, Lauren wasn't really supposed to ever walk again. So this had all been contracted. And trying to maneuver her recovery with a construction crew in your house is tough. I'm trying to maneuver teenagers while dealing with a, brain injury. So, my 17-year-old, we laugh about it now. She had that whole summer where dad was in charge and he's oblivious to what time she comes home. He has no idea what's going on. I've always been the disciplinarian. So, even though life was pretty tragic, it was for, for a young girl that's, going into her senior year of high school, she had a lot of freedom that
Of
she normally
course.
didn't have. So we had a lot that we were dealing with. But, we, as a family, rallied together as best we could. And, just kept pushing forward. And we also went to different specialists all over the country. We went to an aphasia specialist, which was intensive speech therapy. And that was 6-week programs in St. Petersburg, Florida. We were lucky that we were able to do that on 3 different occasions. We also went to a brain injury facility that teaches independence, and that was in Omaha, Nebraska. My kids make fun of me because, we sent Lauren to this place to learn independence, but I also went with her and rented a furnished apartment like 10 miles down the road because I just wasn't prepared to send my daughter, who was, not able to speak fluently, to a place. I needed eyes on her every single day.
Right, right.
So, I spent, 7, 8 months in Omaha with her. And, just everything that we could do to try to help piece her back together and have some sort of, a normal life. This was kind of our new normal, but it was really hard. And my youngest 2 kids were 11 and 13 at the time of the accident.
Hmm.
So, I spent a lot of time away, and my husband is, amazing. I make fun of him a lot in my book. But he's an easy target. But I could not have done what I did, without him. And he really stepped up and learned how to, look up kids' grades online and do the school supply shopping. And actually, they preferred that because they just bullied him. They got top of the line everything as far as school supplies, no budget. But we just really had to change, our way of life and do the new normal. But today, Lauren has, come so far.
Wow.
She's definitely a walking miracle, and she has run 38 5Ks since the
Oh
time of
my
her accident.
goodness.
And we do public speaking together, and it's still, it's her speech. She's very conversational, but she lost her ability to read and write. She can read small phrases. So when we do these speeches, we try to gear them towards, individual people and groups. But when we change that, we just change my part to make it easy. So as far
Hmm.
as, brain injury goes, it's repetition, repetition, repetition. And when we first started doing this, we would go through this, then we would record it, then we would play it back, then we would do it again, and we would do it just dozens of times, and we would start over, and I'd be like, does any of this sound remotely familiar to you? Because we have been doing the same thing over and over again, and she would never get it right. It was kind of like Dory from Finding Nemo. But eventually something stuck, and, she has a sense of purpose again, because she's
Wow.
able to,
Yes.
do these things. And her life looks, she lived in New York, she lived in Manhattan, and life is different now. She lives with her parents, and she watches, her younger siblings, now doing things that she was doing at the time, and getting married and having babies. And it's hard, but it's her life is not how she envisioned it, but it's still great. And,
Hmm.
I'm not a fan of the phrase, everything happens for a reason. I know some people are. And I talk about it in the book too. And I'm like, I'm not offended when people say it. And I almost like want to laugh because I feel like when they read my book, they're going to be like, oh God, I said that to her. And I'm not offended by it. But I feel like when it's your child, you can't think that there's any good reason that this happened. I do think some positive things can come from bad things,
Exactly.
but there is no way anybody will ever convince me that, there's a good reason that this happened, and I think if it happens to yourself, it's different. But as mothers, we just want the easiest possible route for our children. And she took the hardest route that she could. But she's happy, and she's happy now. And I think that's what we all want for our children, right? Is that for them to be happy in whatever capacity that is, as we just want them to be well-rounded, happy, good, kind people. And that she is.
I really appreciate what you said, and I am in total agreement with you. And I don't necessarily, believe that it happened for a reason either, along with many of the things that in my own life and many of the listeners that are listening in their lives. But it's what you do with it, what you make of it, and that's what you said. So even though there might not have been any unforeseen reason that this happened, and maybe You can look at it from any perspective, right? But you are
Sure.
still looking at it from a positive perspective that, yeah, this happened. It was terrible. But, and that's the message that you're giving, not that, oh, I guess it had to happen in order for such and such to happen. So I
Sure.
hear you loud and clear, and I appreciate you saying that 100%. Now, before we talk about your book, I want to read this and then you can share, if you would please, about your book. But you sent this to me via email and it really made an impact on me, and I would like to read it for the audience and then you respond. There are several low points I talk about in the book, but one that stands out was when Lauren was an inpatient at RIC and they sent her to Northwestern Hospital for a CT scan. The nurse at RIC did not stay with her. Lauren was still medically fragile, and I was inept at caring for her. She had C. diff, and I had to try and clean her without help. Once I finished, she began vomiting, and I had to launch myself across the metal bars of the bed to try and hold her head up so she didn't choke. I was soaked in vomit and scared. A while later, the doctor finally came in to give me the findings of the CT scans and to let me know that Lauren would need a fourth brain surgery. Suddenly, the fact that I was soaked with vomit through my bra, I was freezing, and I had a bag full of diarrhea covered clothes seemed rather insignificant. And that is precisely what you have just shared, that you had your priorities straight.
Hmm.
And so now just tell us about your book and whatever you would like to share about that.
Sure. So the book, I'm really, really proud of it. And, it's been out for about a year. And, I thought my mom would buy a couple copies and that would be the end of it. But it's actually done really, really well. At Christmas time, my husband sent me a picture. He was in Barnes and Noble and it was on the shelf there. And I almost fell over.
Mm,
But really well. And, for me, the book is the book that I wish I would have had when,
mm,
this all happened.
right.
And I would read so many books on brain injury, and it would, injury is a pretty big scale. It's, a concussion to this, pretty severe. And I would read so many books, and the person would wake up from their coma and they're, talking to their families, within a week. And I'm like,
Right,
that
right.
wasn't what it looked like. So I wanted to put the reality in brain injury, but also have, a positive, note on it. So throughout the book, and I talk about the hard stuff, it's pretty raw. But I try to end every passage where I talk about the hard stuff
Mm,
with either something positive or something funny. And my writing style has always been kind of like old school Irma Bombeck. I try to find the funny in everyday life. And that's why I think it took me so long to write this book. And I started writing, right away. But when I look at those early passages, they were pretty dark. There wasn't a lot that was funny at the time. And looking back, there were funny things that happened. I
hmm.
just wasn't prepared to see them. And so I had to wait till I was about 6 years removed from Lauren's accident before I could find the funny, and it was
Mm.
there that whole time, but I just wasn't ready to see it yet because I was still kind of cloaked in sadness for so long. So once I finally decided to write the book, it ended up only taking me 67 days from start to
Oh my
finish.
goodness.
So it was, my editor was like, slow down, lady, so he couldn't keep up with me. And it's raw, it's real, it's funny, and my favorite thing that, feedback that I get from people is that, that they're laughing and crying on the same page sometimes.
Mm,
And, there are so many sad parts of her story and so many tragic things that I thought, they needed to be included, but there's so many triumphant things in this story and so many in between. And with a big family, there is lots of material there and lots of, funny stuff, like I mentioned before, with teenagers. I'm dealing with a daughter in diapers, a 25-year-old daughter in diapers, and I'm also at the same time, going to the closet to get supplies, and I'm finding wine bottles stuffed in soccer socks.
gee.
So, there's a lot, a lot of stuff intertwined in there. But in the end, it shows the dysfunction that we went through, but it also shows the love that we all had and the love of the
Mm,
outside, of the outsiders. So it's a love story, but it's also, it's also a comedy, and it's also a tragedy, and it's got everything in there. And the feedback has been great, and I'm super proud of it. But you know, one of the things I hate the most is when people tell me, she wouldn't be where she was without me, and how great I am.
Mm,
And I know the ugly parts of me, and I know the parts where I wasn't so great. On the days that I'd had
mhm,
enough, and maybe I wasn't as nice to her as I should have been. Not in the early days, but like later, like
mhm,
at the
mhm.
5 year mark when I'm crabby, and she's got pretty bad OCD now because of the accident. And the days where I'm just like, I don't want to go get you another chapstick. You have seven. So
Okay.
there's a lot of things in there that I'm not as patient as I should be, but I put it all in the book, the real part. And I thought, finally people are going to stop saying how great I am, because they're going to see I'm not so great. But honestly, it did the opposite. I think people appreciated that
Yes.
because it was real. So I thought, finally I'm going to hear, yeah, but now it's like, no, now I'm relatable. So I think that's why, the book has done so well, is because I was so brutally honest and so raw. And in the end, I'm not a terrible person. I'm not a terrible mother, but am I the best mother in the world? Absolutely not. Am I, covered with mother's guilt? And it's also hard because my focus was all on Lauren. I had six other
Yes, of
kids
course.
that, one of my daughters got engaged right after the accident. So, was I as present as I could have been planning that wedding? Probably not. So it's it's raw. It's, like I said, it's real, and it's got all of life's problems tucked into just a couple hundred pages. But I think people will close that book and think, I can do anything I set my mind to.
And
And
that
I
was,
think it's, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, 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 you go ahead.
And I think too, when I first wrote it, I thought, this will be good for people that have brain injury or people that have aphasia. But I almost think it's better for people that don't. I mean, I think you learn a lot, but I think people with brain injury and aphasia, they all have their own story, and I think they could learn from the story. But I think it's better for anybody that just has anything hard that they're going through. And it kind of gives you the steps. We have like the 5 keys on, how we maneuvered through life during this thing. And they're universal. It's show up, find your cheerleader, kindness is free, work hard, and never give up. And those are lessons that all of us, can learn from, and they're intertwined throughout the book and different things that people did for us. And I think, and it also is used as a learning tool. A couple schools are using it. SLP, speech language and pathology students, it's required reading for some in their curriculum.
Wow.
There's also a high school that's using it. It's funny because one of the teachers, the English teacher that is using it for one of his senior high school English classes, he said, the kid said, she's kind of mean to her husband. And we both laughed, and I'm like, they're not married yet. They'll get it. Like they'll totally understand in a few years. But so it's become so much greater than what I had ever imagined. And I
Wow.
think it really is a universal story that, it is, you really do. You close that book and you think, wow, my problems don't seem so bad right now. And if I come across something that is tough, you know what, I can do whatever I set my mind to.
What I was going to ask you is if you would summarize, and you did it.
Yeah.
So that was perfect. And I also wanted to ask you what the basic message was you wanted the audience to hear, and you've already shared that too. So I
Yeah.
thank you. And your book is available on all the regular platforms.
It is. It is. We also have it on my website if anybody would
Okay.
like a signed copy, which is murphysdon'tquit.com.
Okay, and that'll also be in the show notes so people can connect with you there. So,
Sure.
one final question. Is there anything you want to personally say in summary?
I think basically the most important message, especially for somebody that's going through something really tough, with a family member, so just hang in there. Things may not be better tomorrow or the next day or the day after that, but one thing I can guarantee, is on your darkest days that tomorrow the sun is going to come up, and everything's a little bit better. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other.
And thank you, Colleen Murphy, for being on Never ever give up hope.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Never Ever Give Up Hope, featuring Carol Graham. Did you know that most people succeed because they are determined to? Quitting was never an option. Carol loves your comments and will respond to each one. So please subscribe and review this podcast. A rating of 5 stars would be outstanding and appreciated. Remember, if you are still here, there is always hope.